This drawing is done as a straightforward view. I'm starting this picture with some measuring marks above and below, a center point to divide that length in half. Then I'm putting two markings on either side, the left side and the right side, and this defines the envelope space, or the place where I'm going to put the primary functioning shape, which is the skull in this case. I'm drawing this with slight asymmetrical divisions because the model isn't looking completely forward towards us. She's looking just to the left of us, just over our left shoulder. The center line won't be directly in the middle. It'll be off to the left-hand side of the oval, just slightly from center. I'm building up the hairline on the interior of the skull. This would be considered the second silhouette. I'm using that secondary line to judge how much space I have between the cheeks of the face or the visible skin portions of the face. And once I have that width or that volume defined, then I'll go ahead and build out the rest of the hair shape. I found the cheek on the left side of the drawing, I found the cheek on the right side of the drawing, and I compared both those cheeks to the center line in the middle of the drawing. So that center line is a pivotal point for me to judge my masses. How much to the left and how much to the right am I drawing? The more straightforward a drawing, the more critical the balance between those two sides. The further around we push the face to a three-quarter view, that center line becomes even more critical because it's what keeps our features from slipping back and forth in the drawing, causing structural errors plus causing directional errors on the viewer's part. What I do on the left side, I do on the right side. I find the corner of the temple, I find the other temple. I find the corner of the glabella, the space between the eyes, I find the other side of the glabella. I find one side of the tip of the nose, I find the other side of the tip of the nose. I'm always mirroring what I'm doing when I'm looking at a face straight forward, where all of the features are visible and there's a symmetry present. If I build one side at a time, I'm going to ignore, or I won't be as aware of the symmetry that's present between the features. I'm going around the contour of the outside of the head and I'm adding the hair shape. The hair shape is pressed against the skull, but it has its own life to it. There are areas where the hair is built up a little bit more and areas that are flat against the skull. And so I'm deforming the outside edges to make that statement very clear. I'm now putting in the mouth, and the first markings that I put in were a placeholder space to define where the lips are going to be set. And once I had those markings in, I can judge the distances between the nose and the marking, the chin and the markings that I've made, and I can figure out from those markings how to maneuver them or position them in a different way so that the scale is correct. I'm using all those center points to help define the ear. I'm using measurements from the middle of the face and working my way out towards the side, defining the ear. That's using a horizontal line. It's similar to a vertical plumb line where you hold a plumb bob or a weight at the end of a string that gives you a true vertical line. And you use that vertical line, you cut it through the entire object, and you relate things to each other based on that line. Wherever that line cuts through, let's say the very top of the head, where does the top of the head relate to the features in the face? And that vertical line helps line those things up and assess how those things relate to each other. The rhythm lines that I'm putting in here relate the corner of the nose to the corner of the mouth. Now, the problem that's going to happen here in this drawing, which I normally scold my students for, and I just didn't pay attention to because I was in the hurry or in the moment to draw this picture. I've built all of these features on an inconsistency. The center of the face, I have designed all of the features based on a straight line. And we don't have straight lines in our makeup. The contour that we find around the outside of our head is an organic contour. It goes without saying that the center line of the face would also be an organic contour. So if you rotate the head to profile, the center line of the face is all of the features that stick out and push in. So the forehead sticks out a little bit, then it pushes in the glabella, sticks out to the tip of the nose, pushes in under the nose, sticks back out towards the lips, pushes back in between the lips, sticks back out for the lower lip, pushes back in to the tubercle below the lower lip, then pushes back out again for the chin. That's the center line. The features that I've drawn here are all lined up on my vertical line, and I have not varied that line at all. So you'll notice about halfway through the drawing that the lower lip is off. And about a quarter of the way through the drawing, you'll notice that the mouth doesn't look lined up with the nose the right way. All of those things will change at the very end of the drawing, but I didn't catch that early enough on. So when you're watching this drawing, I'm actually doing an error for quite a while until I catch it and fix it. Another part of the learning experience that I think is really important, and I didn't start this video all over again in filming it to make sure that I drew a perfect picture. I left all the errors in, and I'm going to do that with all of the DVDs that I do with Gnomon, and I'm going to do that to make sure that what we learn is a lesson and not just watch perfection at its finest. I would rather not do that, especially knowing that the function of a video, these videos especially, the function is learning, not showing off. So now getting back into the eyes, I'm doing the same type of thing with the eyes that I've been doing with all the other features. I'm locating the corners, the left corner, the right corner, the topmost point, and the lowest point in the shape, and I'm making markings. Those markings, or the markers that I've created, define the perimeter of the space. Once the perimeter has been defined, then I go in and look for the angles. The angles are unique to each space based upon their height and their width. The taller something is, the steeper the angles are going to be. The flatter something is, with respect to the angle, those angles are also going to be much flatter. When we elevate a shape at a certain height, it defines how the angles, or how the top to the bottom matches up, where the angles are. Here you can see that I've made an attempt to alter the angles of the center line. I'm starting to develop up the contour of the mouth more specifically. And I did do that with the nose earlier on. I made a unique center line that bent towards the lower left-hand side of the screen, and that was the new lift in the center of the face where the nose is. However, if I don't follow that method in the very beginning, and I'm adapting each shape as I go, they might very well fall apart in their alignment because I didn't think of all of them at one time. And in this instance, you will see that. Now I'm filling in this space and I'm taking my time. I could just lay the whole pencil down on its side and blast in tone, but I'm trying actually to build up this picture so that everything has a nice, simple, solid feel to it as I develop each piece up, each section up, each piece meaning each little shape that's filled with a specific tone related to that shape. One way is a quick sketch way. If I just take the side of the pencil and blast it with tone, I'm going to have everything filled in, but it's going to have an abrasion to it or a roughness to it that doesn't feel like a finish, and it'll require that I do a lot more work to clean it up. In this instance, everything is already clean, and all I have to do is continue adding more information to what I've already developed. So I'm taking my time. I'm being very careful to put each thing in. And that's the way you should practice. You shouldn't practice just building up a body of work by doing thousands of drawings and paying no attention to them. Although that would be ideal to have thousands of drawings out of your way before you ever consider yourself pro. You want each drawing that you practice with to be something meaningful in your education. You want to get something from each drawing that you do. Now, when we're doing the drawing, of course, we're not thinking of anything else but that one particular drawing. We're not thinking about how all the other drawings evolved and how this one is going to evolve differently. That's something that we have to think about before engaging in the drawing. And it's sort of like mentally planning ahead before you dive in and go. It is important that you understand why you're doing each drawing, what you're looking for, and then as you go, you're looking for those goals. Once you've achieved those goals, you know when the picture is done or when the lesson has been learned. Anything else that you do is either a bonus or something that takes away from the picture. Now going into the features in the middle of the head, and I'm judging their values based upon the value that I put into the hair. She's dark complected, so I will be building up the halftones in this picture up pretty dark. And I want the initial darkness of the primary features in the hair to have a certain range to it that will allow me to build up those halftones without confusion. I'm hatching in the tones using the side tip of the pencil, the side of the pencil at the tip and not the entire side of the pencil. I'm building these tones up nice and smooth, and you can see that by the type of pencil I'm holding now, I've switched from a softer pencil to a slightly harder pencil. The pencil that I was using before was a 4B, and now this one is a 2B or an HB, and I'll jump back and forth between the two. The softer pencil lays down the tones fairly quickly and puts down the tone without any labor. The harder pencil, however, doesn't put tone down as easily. What we use that harder pencil for is to regulate the softer pencil. We go back over the soft markings and level them out or flatten them out. It acts as a pick or an eraser, and it scoops off any soft material that might be sitting on the surface that makes something look like it's the correct value, but when that surface comes in contact with anything else, it actually destroys what we thought was something very specific. I'm hatching everything in, and then I'll cross hatch to negate it or quiet it down. I am building with halftones and darks at the same time, breaking a little bit of a rule here. The rule would be to go from your darks and work out to your lights. And if I had done all of my darks up front, all of the hair would be filled in already, and I would have the shadow patterns defined and filled in before I move on to those halftones, the one that I'm blocking in on the side of the nose and the one that I'm blocking in around the eye socket. I'm taking liberties because I understand the process of drawing. I can take a couple stages of the drawing and develop them both up at the same time. But to keep in mind that the more I develop at the same time, the less I have any particular focus on any one of those functions. I'll go back and forth holding the pencil like I'm writing and then holding the pencil as if I'm waving a baton. There is no right or wrong way of working, but do keep in mind that when you are first learning, there are more things going against you than helping you out. So anything that I might say in these DVDs that say you should not do this, I'm only saying that for the learning purpose, because once you've learned what you need to do, you should try anything. And you should try anything because the more you practice and the more you extend your abilities, the closer you'll get to what you actually know you need to be doing as an artist. You could be drawing pictures your whole life and never draw what you actually want to draw. The more you practice and the more you experiment, the closer you're going to get to who you really are and what you really want to be saying in your work and how you want to be saying it. That could very well go against everything that you ever learned and everything that you were ever told you should not do. As long as it does the job and gets results the way you're looking for them, you should not have to not do anything because somebody told you not to. You should be able to do whatever you want and still get a result. When you're learning how to control what you draw. So as you're learning these rules that we define very clearly for you, it's for the act of defining something for yourself and seeing results. Once you understand the concept of drawing, anything goes. So I'm taking all of the darks and I'm grouping them up together, regardless of what they are, regardless of whether or not something is a feature or a shadow pattern or the hair, I'm grouping them all up together. Grouping these values up together keeps the shadow patterns pattern-driven instead of me thinking of the hair being its own thing, the face being its own thing, the eyebrow being its own thing. It's allowing all of these elements to group together and become more natural. Naturalized basically just means that we're not looking at the independent parts anymore. We're taking all the parts and we're blending them together to make one solid creation. When we are creating the effect of atmosphere, atmosphere being the air around us, the space that surrounds us, the stuff that we can't label because we can't actually see it. Drawing wants that, especially the type of drawing that's more representational. It really wants that feeling. When we don't apply that feeling to the picture, we end up with all the elements looking separate from each other, or a big mosaic rather than a continuum. This shadow pattern that I'm putting in on the side of the face, it looks a little bit lighter than the other tones that I put in, but that's not the goal here. The goal is to group it up and make it fit with everything else. So as the space gets larger, the pressure does, we need to apply more pressure to the pencil, and I'm actually applying a lot less pressure as I'm filling in those bigger spaces. So it is my fault that the values look lighter, and I'll have to go back in and make those adjustments. And here you can see that I didn't finish the mouth out. I was holding off on grouping those other tones into the picture space, and when I had other things to connect them to. For example, this corner of the mouth that I'm working towards here is blending in with the shadow pattern over on her left-hand side, our right side of the picture. And I wanted all of those shapes to be connected together before I extended the lines out. That way I'm controlling everything as a bigger unit and not individual pieces. Now I'm going back around and refining some of the individual pieces, but I'm not necessarily focusing on them only. I'm definitely thinking of the whole. The angle that I was sitting at when I was drawing this picture didn't allow for me to see the errors that were taking place on the face. Didn't allow for me to see the nose and the mouth. That's a skewed view. And when we skew our view and we draw into it, everything might line up in that skewed angle that we're in. But when we look at everything from straight forward or straight on, we realize that everything has been altered in such a way that it doesn't feel natural. I have no excuses other than my setup sucks. No, I'm just kidding. The setup is really difficult, and so there are going to be things that happen in the drawing as a result of it. Whatever you do when you're sitting or standing in the position that you're in, how you stand or sit is critical to how your picture will develop up. I'm starting to get a little more specific about the shapes. I'm getting involved in the eye now, and I'm looking for the highlights and the variations of tones within the tones. So darker darks within my shadow pattern. And I'm developing up a sensitive edge around these shapes. The sensitive edge is more akin to the size of the shape. A smaller shape wants a more refined edge, as much as a larger shape wants more generalized edges. The larger shapes that we place in the picture tend to be construction shapes. They tend to be in the very beginning of the picture, and they're going to be more mechanical. They're going to be, then that's just their nature. When we first start with these lines, they are the mechanical boundaries for which we establish the picture. So they are going to be a little more rigid. They are going to be less definitive to the specifics of the face. But now I'm getting more involved in that layer of thinking because the bigger portions of the picture have already been established, albeit not that well because of the position that I was taking under the lights and the camera. I'm using a harder pencil. I think I'm using a 2B or an HB, and I'm cutting into the softer tones a harder value. It's filling in the pores, the holes that the softer tones wouldn't fill in, or the softer pencil wouldn't fill in, as well as leveling or smoothing out the values so they don't feel so spotty all over. One thing I pay a particular attention to are the corners where a lot of shapes meet, like the corners of the eyes. I try blurring those corners by using the darkness of the shapes as much as I possibly can. I don't want things too scientific in those areas. I actually want them to feel a little more natural the way they come together. The small spaces, or what we call insertion points, where a lot of things connect together, can be a little bit on the busy side when we draw them in. And I'm trying to avoid any kind of tangencies or any kind of thing, a distraction of some sort that might take the viewer's eyes from the focus and force them to look at other things. It's not that important that we define all of the little blocks of shape in a cheekbone. It's more important that we define how the cheekbone meets other shapes, like the eye socket and the jawline. And we want the same kind of subtlety that we see out in front of us. That means getting back from our drawing enough so that we can recognize whether or not we're building something subtle or we're just defining something in a very constructed fashion. So with this harder pencil here, I am softening up the edges along the boundaries that I've defined the shadow pattern. That's building up a more organic state or nature, where those harder edges just look more sculpted, like they're made out of marble or made out of stone. I hope that by the end of the drawing, everything feels soft and somewhat fleshy and not so beaten into the drawing and so critically designed. Everything in stages, though. There is a moment where design is more important than subtlety, and then there will be a point when subtlety is much more important than everything else that we did before that. I'm working all over, meaning that within this space of features, I'm working between the eyes, the nose, and the mouth, all the time thinking of each of those shapes and each of those features, and thinking about how all those features relate to each other. It's a duality thing going on there. And sometimes that duality thing sounds like we're driving ourselves nuts, thinking of too many things at once and too many contradictory things. But that's exactly what art is, a series of contradictions based upon foundation and rules that we learned at some point that were fixed. Here is where I start to lose the orientation between the tip of the nose and the mouth. If you notice the lower lip doesn't feel like it's lined up with the upper lip anymore. I was spending more time thinking about the shadow pattern on the upper lip. And the upper lip to the nose, while they feel fairly close, the lower lip is destroying the illusion and making the mouth and the nose not feel like they belong together. This is something that I will be catching later on in the drawing, but I'm not aware of it at the moment while I'm building this picture up. I'll point those things out as I catch them and what I do with them to alter their state. So as I mentioned in the profile picture, this one has, or this drawing has halftones, darks, lights, accents, just like any full value representational drawing. And while we learn how to do these things in stages, we keep the shadowy stage all in its own place and state. We keep the halftone stage in its place and state, and we develop them up so that we understand what we're doing with each of those stages. Once you've learned the stages, then you're free to develop them up however you choose to. In this picture here, I have now crossed the boundary between halftones and shadows, and I'm merging the two together. If you're new to drawing, this is not something that you want to do, because you're still not very clear on what is a shadow and what is a halftone and what is directly lit. As smart as engineers are, I have a lot of engineers in my classes, and they don't see these things very easily. They don't see the difference between these things. As science-minded as they are, they're not seeing the right thing. This is a tool that you have to learn to use. It's not just something that's intuitive, as much as we would think it is, because we're all naturally lit by the sun and we're shaded by the sky, or we're naturally lit by the moon and shaded by the rest of the atmosphere surrounding it. It's not something that we're physically aware of, each of us as an individual. Just like we're not born aware of the differences in temperatures and the differences in colors. We're not aware of the differences of light and shade. A very simple principle, but not something that we take the time to understand much about. Unless there's a reason for it in our lives, it's sort of information that's not very necessary, although we live by our eyeballs and we believe in what our eyes see. We just don't have the right information that trains our eyeballs to understand what they're looking at. That's what an artist does. The artist spends their entire life training their eyeballs to go against physiological nature, the physiological nature of the eyeball. We're training to break all of the habits that we were born with so that we see new things in a completely different light or in a completely different way than the common consumer or just any old person walking around on the street. They don't have to go through the same training that we do in order to break their habits to make illusions more appropriate. We have to do that. So as I'm developing up these tones, I keep going back to the darker values first and then work my way through the halftones. What I'm doing is I'm developing a sensibility for how much range I'm supposed to push. And when I'm in specific areas of the picture, I know of the quality of value that I'm supposed to be working within, whether or not it is supposed to be a lighter value or a darker value, which will change up my habit for how I work with those values. A lighter value, I'm going to be more sensitive to very little pressure on the pencil, while a darker value, I'm going to be aware of very little pressure on the pencil, but the ability to build up in layers, and not needing to be so heavy-handed and critical about getting all of that dark filled in all at one time. Now, in some drawings, I wish that I could have kept the drawing in an earlier stage of development. A lot of the lines and tones right now in the muzzle I really like because they're so simple and they're so quickly and easily developed up. And I feel like towards the end of this picture, I made things a little more muddy and complicated than I actually wanted them to be. I wish that I could have preserved some of these earlier stages and just kept the drawing in that state. But you learn by doing, and I learned by doing here how far I went and how beyond what I should have done I went. But at the end of this drawing, I do come back and fix some of the things. I wish we had the undo button that we have in Photoshop in life. It would be great, right? And I'm sure you've heard everybody say that who uses Photoshop in some way and draws pictures. I'm sure you've heard the cliche that they make. I wish I had an undo button right now. I would undo half the moves I made. I'm going to go ahead and be one of those cliches, and right now is a great stage for the mouth and the tip of the nose, and I wish I left it at this stage, and I'll just leave it at that. So the pencil is flying right now, and it might look like that I'm putting a tone in both directions as I'm shading, but the reality is I'm only putting tone down in one direction. That's what's keeping the tones nice and smooth and consistent. If I had gone back and forth, you would see scribble marks, and those scribble marks come complete with these things that I call tails. And the tails are the very end of the brushstroke or the very end of the line that we draw. It's the leftover trailings that when the pencil is lifted off the page, it creates. I don't have any of those in this drawing because I'm not shading in a back and forth way. My hand goes back and forth, the tone goes down in only one direction. And that is definitely something that I am always conscious of, whether I'm doing a demo or just a drawing for myself. I'm always aware of that particular asset in drawing. And if I stick with doing that, then all of my drawings end up much cleaner and much healthier looking and a little bit simpler in the very end. So the other thing that I wasn't very keen to when I was sitting in the position that I was drawing this picture was the gaze of both eyes. Right now, both eyes are not looking in the same direction. One is looking more towards us and the other one is looking away from us. And as I look at the drawing a little bit more and come back to it in the later stage to recorrect it, I address those eyes then. And I might actually end up addressing it here along the way. but I won't have made the correct change until the last sitting when I come back in and make some of the changes, fixing the picture. Now this eye is the focus of the picture, and I'm spending a little bit more time on it. The other eye is lighter and is more visible, but this eye has more personality to it, with the shadow patterns being what they are, and the highlight having a little bit more light to it because of it being surrounded by more darkness. I wanted this eye to be the stronger of the two that leads you into the picture first. When we look at portraits, because we're looking at people, we look at the eyes first. As much as we might be shy, a portrait doesn't talk back to us, so no matter who we are, we're going to look at that portrait the same way. And a good majority of people start right at the eyes and then work their way around the picture from there. There's new technology that is being used that has helped us to understand the tracking of the eye and how people look at pictures. And a portrait, especially, if it has a person in it, we look at the person. If it has a face visible, we look for the eyes. We're always looking for that first, because what we want to know is, who is this person and how do they feel? And the eyes tell the story, so we go there first. And because of that, I'm going to spend a little bit more time on the eyes and make sure that they have more information within them for the viewer to appreciate. And at the same time, hopefully more ambience or more of a blur between these details, giving them a strength that's more realistic looking. So I'm neglecting the hair, and I'm neglecting the neck and the shoulders. I know that the camera is zoomed in very closely to the features here, so I'm paying particular attention to them. However, this isn't a good practice. A good practice would be to incorporate all parts of the picture at once. Probably the reason why I didn't catch, or one of the reasons why I didn't catch the errors in the alignment of the features earlier on. I just wasn't building this picture the way I would normally build a picture. It was built in different stages, based upon the camera and where the camera was positioned to the drawing. I've zoomed out a little bit, and so I'll end up working on the neck and the cast shadow underneath the neck, the hair. But I won't be working on the top of the skull because you guys won't see that. And so again, I'm drawing in a picture that's a little bit broken because I haven't put all the elements in the way that I would fashion it if I'm normally doing this myself, for myself. I keep talking about these features being off, and if you have an untrained eye, you might not notice that they are off, but they are off just enough to bother a trained eye and someone who knows. If you know, you just know. And you don't need to look at something for very long to understand that it is a little off. And I'm still not aware of it. I just keep going and going and going. Sometimes you'll see the pencil hesitate before putting any tones down. Well, you'll see the artist hesitate before they put a mark down on the page. What I'm doing is thinking about how much pressure to apply. Is this an area where tone is critical, or can I get away with not putting something here? If I do need to put something here, how do I need to put it down? Can I put it down in a haphazard way, or do I need to be very deliberate about my markings and which direction should I make them? I usually think hovering right over the page. My hand will be hovering there in idle, waiting to be used while my brain is working out a solution, and then I go to work attacking it. A statement that I've heard again and again from many, many different teachers: think twice, draw once. Think 3 times, draw once. Think 4 times, draw once. However the number is for each one of them, look more, draw less. It's a good rule to follow. By going on instinct, sometimes we are not aware of certain habits that we have in our own work, and that we're falling into those habits as a trap. Sometimes we're just not there. Our brain is thinking about other things, and those habits can get in the way pretty quickly.